it's predictable, overdue, and there was this article. It sort of resonated with certain feelings I've been having recently. I talked specifically about the MFA industrial complex. Its effect and just sort of like the way it's subsumed literary culture in this country, if there is such a thing. I mean, anybody who reads or wants to be a writer, it's like if you don't get an MFA, well, this article. Okay, so there was this article in Hobart where this author who had attended Iowa Writers Workshop, which is the number one most prestigious MFA program there is. But he's a Cuban American writer from Miami, I think, and he was a baseball player, and his baseball career didn't really work out, so he went to Iowa. And through his experiences in the publishing world as a sort of token minority writer, he's sort of become jaded, and he quit basically, creative writing or fiction writing, and now he writes sort of these articles. He's like a cultural commentator and shit. So anyway, there was this interview with this guy on Hobart, which I don't personally... I mean, Hobart is like a nerd lit kid kind of website. I don't really read Hobart, but it's out there. It's like an English program website, to be honest. Like, not everybody who's a fucking writer is tied to a school. Not everybody who's a writer did well in English class. Not everybody who's a writer was a fucking English major. Like, it's weird. It's just like everything in our society. It's become kind of stratified and codified and corporatized. Whatever. The cart leads the horse. It's all about your credentials. It's all about where you went to school, which, to be honest, in the creative fields, that's not really how it works. It's like you're supposed to write a good fucking story, and that's what makes you a writer. How you become a writer is a little bit mysterious. That's not really how it works anymore now. A lot of these fucking MFA kids go right from undergrad. So they have an MFA when they're 24 years old or something. They've never even been out of college. And they're the best writers we have, according to this credential-led system. It's all about, did you go to Iowa? Did you go to Michigan? Did you go to Columbia? Where is your MFA from? So anyway, this article, the guy... he can be a mouthpiece for sort of anti-woke, for lack of a better word, politics, because he's Cuban. And he sort of got into the FA thing because, it was one of the factors that allowed him to go to Iowa, right? Because they want to accept more people like that. That's part of their kind of system right now. And so... one of the things he complains about is they want you to write a certain kind of story. He claims that it's these white... And to be honest, the interview is laden with... I don't know if he's a Trumper, but he sounds like a Republican. And so I'm not on board with really what the guy is saying. It's just interesting how this article has kind of lit up the internet. And I'm not condoning it or, signing on for it. I just wanted to use it as a platform to discuss my own thoughts and opinions on kind of the literary landscape in this country and the MFA Ponzi scheme in particular. Being somebody that is not a part of that, and it has been sort of like a wall that's kept me on the outside, for better or for worse, for the duration of my literary career, which doesn't even really exist because there's a number of things, some of which the guy goes into in this interview, and it's just interesting because it's allowed the conversation. It's not unexpected that this conversation would sort of resurface a few years after the Trump era. But in any case, the guy claims that like a lot of these editors are like white feminists. That's what he accuses them of, and they're looking for a certain kind of story or a certain kind, because that is the kind of like agenda. That's the line that everybody has to toe politically, where it's like, and he says this in the interview, right? White people are bad, America's bad, men are bad, you know, brown people are magical and good and everything they do. And, you know, like, I'm not signing on for that stuff, but the article is an interesting place. To be honest, there's truth to that, right? There are these kind of broad strokes that people are using, and there's good reason, right? There's good reason why the publishing industry and whatnot is being reformatted. I mean, this guy, having gone to Iowa, particularly in 2009, he was sort of between these two eras at a point where, and he brings up a lot of these writers in the interview, writers like Raymond Carver, Dennis Johnson. They were the sort of like imminent influences, particularly at Iowa Writers Workshop. I think they taught there, or they had like a long history with that place. And these were the writers that sort of typified the New Yorker style, whatever. And all of the fiction writers, anyway, were more or less trying to imitate Jesus' Son and Where I'm Calling From and all of the Raymond Carver shit. The New Yorker style of fiction. Whereas that stuff, right, is looked on as toxic now. Raymond Carver was an alcoholic. He was bad to his wife. Dennis Johnson, probably not that much better. I'm not exactly sure what his story is, but like, they're both white guys, right? And to be honest, like, I feel like it is exciting to be in a literary world where the landscape is opened up and there is like suddenly a diversity in all kinds of authors. I find that exciting. The part that is maybe a little bit overcorrective is like, I do think there's truth to like, it's flattening out the writing. Everybody kind of writes the same, and it's just, I think it pigeonholes minority writers or the diverse, the very voices that it's trying to champion. A lot of times it just reduces them and gets them to like simplify. Like he's saying in this interview, it's like there's a certain kind of story they want. They want the person of color protagonist to be victimized by America, to be victimized by whatever, capitalism, white supremacy, you know. And there's real evil to all of this stuff. Like, there are good reasons why things have been opened up, but like, to be honest, the literature, you know, one thing he talks about is they want it to be a little edgy, you know, like they want it to have a little bit of like the grit of like the authenticity of like, you know, the non-white experience, but they don't want it to be too edgy. This is something he was complaining about, is like, he would write these stories where he was playing like the good kind of like person of color writer and sort of did everything that these white feminist women editors in New York, he calls them Brooklyn, you know, they all live in Brooklyn, and they work for major publishing houses and stuff. They've got the New Yorker tote bags and all this. And I have some experience with this. That was part of what was interesting about reading the articles. Like, it kind of, there were a few things about it that I think kind of maybe helped materialize certain, or it definitely resonated with certain things I've been feeling. You know, this idea of a literary citizen, unless you have an MFA. I think that's true. This is something that I've been sort of talking about recently, but I didn't say it in those terms, but like, for me, it's been like, yeah, nobody takes you seriously. You don't exist really as a writer unless you have an MFA. Like, at least having an MFA is like the fast track. You know, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've been in New York for over 10. I have a lot more experience, and to be honest, I'm a better literary citizen, let's say, then I would say most of the people I meet are A's. And yet, you don't really have a seat at the table. It's very hard to work your way in to get them to take you. I mean, particularly, right, at this moment in time, being a straight white guy. Like, one of the things the article talks about is like certain of these literary feminist Brooklyn editors would reject stories for being too bro-y. They sort of, they might like something, but then it'd be like, it's too bro-y. And like, I've definitely gotten that criticism from time to time that it's broetry, right? And I mean, this guy has a little bit probably more insider knowledge than I do because he went to Iowa, he had an agent, he's met with a lot of I never even thought about getting a fucking agent. To me, that's like, that's not really what writing is about. Like, that's career shit, that's money shit. It's the same thing with these people who like want to win all the grants, and their whole shit is geared to that stuff. They want tenure. They race to all the mastheads. I think that's one thing that's been pathetic and just like inauthentic, and why everything sucks now is because all of these mastheads, the New Yorker, the New York Times, whatever, the Paris Review, they're all peopled with rich elite children of elites. All the people who went to Harvard or Yale or Columbia or NYU or wherever, they're all the children of elites. There's very little, there's not the same kind of social mobility in a weird way in our society. Like, all the fucking TV shows are like rich people kids. All the fucking literary shit, it's like people were born in New York, people who went to prestigious universities. The only people who can even, there's very small percentage of people outside of the elites in this country who are going to be able to even get into or pay for Columbia University or NYU Creative Writing Program or Pratt or New School or Cal Arts or whatever the fuck it is. It's already a class issue. And so you don't find stories like me anymore, where it's just like, I'm this dude from Columbus, I came to New York, and just through the sheer, work, kind of make it or whatever. I mean, I suppose that's what going viral is, but like, that doesn't seem to be anybody that I can see's like literary experience. It's all like Tao Lin went to NYU. I mean, he's Asian. Nothing against that, but like, it's easy for these elite editors to choose writers based on that now, because they, being guilty white feminists trying to do the right thing, that's what they want. A Sean Thor Conroe or whatever. They want a Tao Lin. They want a Jenny Zhang. Not that those people aren't writers, but also, like, to some degree, they've gamed the system. So by putting all these quotas in all universities where it's like, well, you have to be X, Y, or Z to even get in. You have to be POC or this or that. And then the writers are the people who go to these fucking universities. Like, there isn't a whole lot of chance for people outside of that. In, like, the literary world, it's a bunch of rich. I mean, okay, so my own personal experience, and this what this guy said is 9 out of 10 book agents and people in publishing, he said, were Brooklyn women who were crying into their tote bags when Hillary lost. Okay, and my own personal experience, right, and I was talking about this yesterday, was this has been my whole life, my whole life experience writing and literature, actually, is in high school, I submitted this story to the literary magazine Either Or, and it got accepted. And the story was about, it was one page, and it was sort of gonzo journalism. It was like it was first person, you'd call it autofiction, I guess now. It was about this real thing that happened to me. I went with this kid who lived next door. We were walking to this waterfall in our neighborhood, which I didn't know about. I'd never been to. It's like you walk down this creek and you go across these roads and all through these woods, and all of a sudden you come upon this waterfall. So the story's about this journey, right? Nature and shit. And so we walk, it's like, an hour, 2 hours to get there. When you're kids, it's like, it was like one of those kind of things you do on a Saturday afternoon that's like a journey, right? And so we go, and we're on the top of this waterfall, and we get to the waterfall, and we're looking down, and we look over, and there's these two naked guys. And there's a photographer, and they're making like a gay pornography. And so the story was about that. And it was a joke. I mean, I suppose layered in there in some kind of subtextual way. Not intentional, but you gotta keep in mind this was 1999 or whatever in Columbus, Ohio. Like this was South Park era. It's like the joke is that like it's kind of unexpected and it's just kind of a funny thing, especially for a kid, 13, 14-year-old to. And so the story got accepted, but then they didn't publish it because all of the fucking people on the literary magazine were the same people in Amnesty International. It was our friend Erie, who now is like very high up in the Democratic Party, and they're operators. They're all operators, they're all, she ran like social media for like the attorney. She just made her way up in political stuff very quickly. My friend Jenna, right, who I'll get to this in a second, but she lived in New York. I think she lives in Florida now. She's super cool. I love Jenna. She's Mexican American, right? And so that's like at the forefront of her thinking about writing and literature and whatnot. Not a big deal, but like everybody on the literary magazine was, for lack of a better word, what you would call woke now. Not that that was necessarily, there's no language for that, or that was like not necessarily totally explicit with the magazine, but like it wasn't necessarily people that were the best or even writers, to be honest. Like as far as I knew, I was the only person in the whole fucking high school who even took literature that seriously. I don't think there was anybody who was reading as deeply as I was in high school. And even though I didn't necessarily have like the most developed writing process, I tried as hard as I could to like write deeply in high school. And to be honest, the things that I was doing then, I'm still doing a lot of it today. And so, I didn't submit a lot of stuff to the literary magazine, either or. And at that point, I didn't join the literary magazine because, I was a snob and I was afraid to get involved with stuff. I didn't know how to get involved with stuff. I thought that they didn't know as much as I did. I thought I saw the people who were on it, like my friend Luke Bolzenius or Ben Hartenstein, and I was like, or Eric Eicholt, I was like, these guys don't know as much about literature as I do. And they're the fucking staff. They're the readers deciding what gets accepted. And so they accepted my piece and then they rejected it. And in a certain way, I feel like I didn't realize it, but I do feel like that is kind of what has happened to me throughout my life trying to participate as a writer for the most part. Definitely in poetry world. I mean, and that's because it's not a meritocracy in a lot of ways. It is an exclusionary gatekeeping place. And to be honest, over the past few decades, I feel like there has been like sort of a concentrated program to get positions of power and to sort of solidify like a block of power within academia and within the publishing industry and push out, toxic male, the alcoholic philandering professor types, who are sleeping with their students or whatever. Awful kind of white guys. And to be honest, like, a lot of that does need to change. It needs to be rooted out. But I wasn't a part of that either. And I don't necessarily think it leads to the best writing is kind of my ultimate point. I go to a lot of open mics and I read a lot of stuff. I get Poetry Magazine. And there are interesting things out there. But I don't think that, to be honest, the way that they're training, because that's what an MFA program is, it is training like you're a fucking dog. they're training these writers to write bland and to victimize themselves, and like, it's just, the writing is not that interesting. There are a lot more interesting things out there in our tradition that are not being studied. And in fact, I think they're being vilified, actually. Like the whole thing, like the CIA started abstract expressionism. Like, give me a fucking break. Like, the CIA started the fucking Paris Review. The CIA started these MFA programs. It started Iowa and shit. I don't think it... Maybe they dump money into abstract expressionism, and I understand there are certain political reasons why, but that doesn't mean abstract expressionism is inherently politically, like, useful to, like, what, white supremacist capitalist U.S. imperialism or something? Like, that was like a talking point among lit kids a few years ago about how abstract expressionism was like CIA funded and shit. So anyway, I was going, so I won, in my undergrad, I won a fucking award for a short story I wrote. I won the best short story contest at Ohio State University. Like, then so, I've taken myself seriously as a writer most of my life, but I've also always been an outsider. And I do feel like the literary world, like all of these elite institutions, like the universities and shit, they've been reduced to like applications. And they're just monopolized by like the least interesting kind of pencil neck case of all of us, where it's just like the people that got straight A's, who got 4.0 grade point average, who filled out their college application, who did everything right, who went to college, who got the transcripts. It's like these kids that like got jobs as that. So okay, fast forward to present day New York. The literary magazine thing was 20 years ago in high school. In present day New York, okay, this was before Trump. This was around the time Trump was sort of just gaining steam. My friend Jenna, who was on the Either Or staff high school, lives in New York. And we're good friends. I've seen her on Scenes from Life. She's in a few episodes. We were great friends, and she introduced me to her friend, and she's in this romance novel reading group at Word Bookstore, I think, in Greenpoint. They meet every Saturday. All these girls, they're smart, they're brainy, they went to good schools, they're readers, they're horny. They get turned on by thinking and shit. So they're just my type. And they're smart. And they are all, they work in publishing. They live in New York. This one girl from our high school, Emily G., she was on the high school literary magazine staff too. Now, she lives in New York. She works for some publishing company. She's an editor or something. She's an agent. And so Jenna goes to this book club every Saturday. Smart girls, all went to good schools. They're professional as fuck. These are the feminists. These are the Hillary. These are the pink hats, right? These are the Swifties. I love these women. I don't know why they hate us, right? And yet I've managed to coexist with them in New York for over a decade. They're starting to thaw out a little bit, but for a few years there, it was a Lysistrata type situation. And so Jenna has all these beautiful friends that she never introduces me to because she knows that I'm just like, piece of shit. Or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a piece of shit, but anyway, they're just my type. They're all really pretty and smart and literary and cerebral and shit. So anyway, she brings this girl to a party at the Last Resort in Bed-Stuy, who is the classic what this guy is describing in this article. He's the classic, like, she went to Wesleyan, she got a 1600, she got a perfect score on her SATs, she was in this band called Field Guides, which has been kind of around Brooklyn the whole time. They're just wimpy. They're like twee bullshit. But she's just got like the perfect resume for like New York. Like she worked at Manhattan Inn, and like she's fucking hot as hell, and like, you know, she's smart as hell. Her parents were smart. They raised her the right way. She was like, she grew up in Wyoming, but I think her parents were like super smart and successful, and they like chose to bring her up in Wyoming to be like away from society. But like, you know, she's very accomplished and like pretty type A as far as like whatever she goes after, she's probably gonna get it. And like, you know, she thinks very highly of herself, or like, you know, she was just a tough, sure-headed kind of interlocutor and critic and this and that. And, you know, she's successful. She edits Dimitri Martin's book and shit. Like, she edits all these famous people. I think she maybe edited BJ Novak's book. Like, she's hot and smart as fuck. And, like, an editor, like, these, of course, guys want her to be, you know, I think that's what happened in the publishing industry, is all these horny guys hired all these hot, smart women of my generation because they wanted to have sex with them. And the women, being smart, kind of judoed the shit into, you know, the woke agenda in this preponderance of ugly book covers that is everywhere now. I mean, I don't really read anything that's out there except poetry. I sort of follow poetry, but even that, most of it is not that interesting. So anyway, okay. So I end up kind of hitting it off with this girl. I walk her home from this party. We, you know, a few weeks later, we watched Purple Rain, which was her choice, of course. She's just like, she's the ultimate, you know, progressive. I'm with her. You know, this was when Trump, but I didn't date her because at that point I was in love with somebody else. And it just petered out quickly because, you know, I didn't have a job. I didn't really make that much money. I'm like this pot-smoking kind of wannabe poet or whatever. You know, she's editing Dimitri Martin's book. She has her own apartment. She's got this huge fucking dog that's like her boyfriend. And I'm just clearly not good enough for her. I'm not tall enough for her. She said something about she couldn't wear heels, or like she was afraid to wear heels or something. It's just, you know, when she first saw me, she saw me playing at this party, and Olivia and a couple of her friends were like sort of, because Olivia was like laying it on pretty thick. And so they were sort of like gaga over me. And so I think this Maddie girl saw that and was like, oh, those girls like are in love with this guy. Like, I'm gonna like, he, you know, make him mine or whatever. But like, she gradually just found out that I was just like, plus it was just Trump era. So I was just getting my ass kicked from all angles, and like, I couldn't really hold my own with her in a lot of ways. Just like, we got into arguments about shit, and she just like, she just thought she was way smarter than me, right? And maybe she fucking was, I don't know. But this is part of the attitude that I resent. It's like, just because you got scores or you went to fucking school, like that's, we live in a world of this now. We live in a world of like statistics and like credentials and pay to play. You gotta, I think, you know, when people bitch, like, right, the past week has been the student loan cancellation. And this is a big thing for the spoiled brat millennials, my generation, is bitching about, you got to cancel the student loans. And it's like, the reason why they have fucking student loans is because these fucking schools charge $100,000 to get a goddamn MFA. And if you don't get an MFA, you're never going to get a job. And you're not invited to the table. You're not in the club if you don't have an MFA. But the truth is, literature and art and books are bigger than that. I mean, there's a lot of money in the MFA industrial complex because there's a lot of money in universities because of the financialization of fucking education which should be illegal over the past 30 years. For the boomers financial, like they did with everything, like they're doing with everything. It's a lot more expensive than it used to be. And it's all loans. It's all student loans. I remember the first thing I saw when I went to college on my orientation day. The first thing I remember seeing was signing up credit card tables. Right when we walk in, they have tables lining the fucking quad or whatever. Sign up for this, 18% interest rate. It's like you're 18 years old. Like, granted, these kids should have known better. I knew better. I didn't go really to college, away to college. I didn't spend $100,000 in college because I knew I didn't want to get into fucking student loan debt. Nobody else seemed to understand that, and everybody's got shitloads of student loan debt. But it's part of this deal. Now it's like if you don't go to the right school, and these people just get grouped with their MFA cohorts. It's pathetic. They're babies. It's like making friends with the people you went to fucking preschool with and never meeting anybody else. It's like they put you together with 10 other writers. It's like, these are your friends for life. These are going to be your readers. And it's like, I had to do that in the real world. I have a lot more experience. I've probably read a lot more. I know a lot more poetry. I probably know a lot more writers. I've been published. I've published other people. Like, there's a lot of thinking that goes into the way that I write, and I understand that it is different than what people do in MFA programs. It's a source of huge frustration for me. The fact that, like, I probably couldn't even get into an MFA program because I don't write that way. Like, I'm not trying to write a 10-page packet. Everything now in literary world is fucking submittable.com, right? It's all just like, give us your 10-page sample, send 3 to 5 poems, send a 2 letters of recommendation, send your transcripts, your CV, send an artistic statement. Like, that's not art. How about I send you my art? How about I send you my book that I wrote? How about I send you some of my chat books? How about I send you my TV show? How about you watch my video blog? I run an open mic in New York City. I've run, readings in New York City since 2014. Like, how many people who went to fucking Iowa have done that? And yet, I don't get any credit for anything. That's the fucked up part. And it does feel like fucking white women just taking revenge on dudes out of some kind of perceived bitterness or something that's like been trained into them by the media. They all think they're Taylor Swift Disney princesses. And like, we're just dogs. And like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of smart, talented women writers out there. That's something I've tried to champion. If you look at Easy Paradise, there's more women in Easy Paradise than men. And I do as much as I can to promote strong women writers. Because I'm a real literary citizen. A big reason why I admire the people I do and I pattern myself off the people I do, such as the Beats or the New York School or the East Village poets that I know who live in rent-controlled apartments, is because they actually live it. They're not, like, protected by some kind of stupid academic program where they're just phony and have to compromise everything and just, like, go out to dinners and, they make their own magazines. They go to open mics. They go to their friends' readings. They hang out. They publish each other. Like, they write. They go to art museums. They go to gigs. It's like a caste system, man. It's like, I can't handle the literary glad handing, and I actually do, I judge those people, and I think that, like, it's bad for literature. I think that there are interesting things happening and important things happening, but a lot of these people are also full of shit. And that kind of sucks. It kind of sucks that all these people are like, they are virtue signaling and all this kind of thing. Like, that's a big part of it. Like, if there were more substance to it, but it's a hard pill to swallow being like one of the younger people who's being passed over and seeing all these old people like thinking they're doing the right thing when it's like you're fucking white. You know, like these older white people that think they can feel good about themselves for like championing younger writers who aren't white. It's like you're fucking white. It's the same with these editors where they just want to show that they're like not guilty, you know? It's just about some kind of like shame and like these white feminist editors. So yeah, so this girl, it just kind of petered out, and that's the impression that I get, right? That is who's choosing what gets published. And I don't know, I don't it's hard to say where to go. Like, because with the internet, there is just like this suffocating awareness at how like unimportant you are and how like not a part of the landscape you are. I mean, a big right is like on your Twitter profile, MFA, Iowa, you know, published in the New Yorker, Poetry Magazine, Plowshare. That's what anybody is going to lead with. And I suppose I probably should work more on my writing, but everybody is their own little identity cranny or whatever. But um, the guy clearly has a way. There's certain things that I wouldn't go as far as him. To be honest, I do think woke diversifying of um, like you can't tell people what stories they have to tell, and I don't know. Just lead cool kids you and benefit by it. So yeah, all the rest of us. I mean, it's especially it's hard because like at least in the 60s, 70s, there were economic conditions that allowed things like the Beat Generation or the New York School. Like, okay, if you look at all these second, third generation New York School people, and a lot of the people I meet in East Village, they have apartments. Like, that is what has allowed them to write the way that they've written, to live the way that they have for their whole lives, to publish Mimeo magazines, to write punk style, not necessarily for readability, not necessarily for legibility. You know, with our generation, everything is so financialized and down to the last cent, and nothing goes sort of, and there's no protection. Like they can charge whatever they want. It's market. Like there's no time. There's no jobs. So it's like New York City. There's a lot of turnover. It's not like where all these fucking people moved here and they still live here. You know, the reason is because the rent's so goddamn cheap. Like, I hate to say it, but like, that's an enviable position for any artist. I of a similar circumstance offered to people are there's nothing even close. Like, I can sign a lease for a rent controlled apartment and I'm gonna pay, you know, $500 a month for the rest of my fucking life for rent. It's like it's such a fact of our lives now. It's like people pay $1,000 a month for, you know, 3 other roommates way the fuck out in Brooklyn or something. It's a completely different landscape. And to be honest, it's killed your alternative. It's harder for writers to gather, to create. You know, something like the Poetry Project was outside of traditional institutions. It was something they grant money. They were able to voice enough writers who lived in the neighborhood who all had rent-controlled apartments or cheap rent, who could spend time editing magazines, poetry, being at the bar, doing readings, recording readings. It's not quite, there's not quite that opportunity now, you know? Everybody works their ass off. Or they have rich parents. The only people who can do that have rich parents. So that's who lives in Manhattan. That's who lives in Brooklyn for the most part. People whose parents pay their rent. People whose parents are probably finance criminals or venture capitalists or investors or, you know. So how interesting can they be, right? If you have rich parents, if you're from Florida, come to New York, how interesting can you be? Probably not that interesting. Probably not as interesting as some guy from Detroit in the 70s who could afford to move to New York City because it was cheap. And I mean, even then, it wasn't like, you know, it was still just people from New Jersey and shit. Patti Smith's from New Jersey, Springsteen's from New Jersey. Very few people make it from where I'm from into elite New York. It's not easy. There's a lot of reasons why it's not easy. Economically, it requires a lot of sacrifice. You know, the American dream is bullshit, but the idea being, at least for like, sense, I moved from Columbus, Ohio to New York, and through work, intelligence, talent, and doing it right, meeting the right people, whatever. But really, those things you could get. And, in the literary world, in the writing world, I don't. What are the examples of that? I'm not sure. Of that is Steve Rogenbuck. Remember him? I mean, Tao Lin went to NYU. To me, that's just, you know, I didn't even get to New York till 2011, basically. Tao Lin was probably here in the mid-2000s, if not earlier. Plus, all of these fucking writers, the only way they can make a living now, I mean, I guess publishing industry probably doesn't make as much money as it used to. There's not as many readers as there used to be. Maybe newspapers, right? There's not as many jobs for writers. There's not really the same apprenticeship, right? Like journalism used to be like Hemingway fucking got a job as like a cub reporter on or whatever. That's like how he learned how to write. Or it was like a start anyway. Now it's like there's all these unpaid internships and shit like that. But like to be honest, that's even like an arrangement with rich people. And to some degree, you know, woke sort of affirmative action type hiring or whatever, because the people that are going to get those internships, they're going to get more credit if they're not white. It's going to be looked on as like a diversity hire, so they're going to try to bring you on. You know, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but there needs to be like a little bit of room for still need to be like some kind of ecosystem for just like a non-academic literary world, because I do just particularly when it comes to the political stuff, it becomes so oriented toward that like I literally feel like all these writers are doing the same fucking thing. It's just they have a different lens that they put it through. And it's just been bad for poetry. There's a lot of good poetry that's not being read or appreciated. A lot of the things, like New York School, I think. You know, New York School doesn't exactly lead with identity politics. It's like a privilege. Part of why the political content, the implicit meaning to everything in New York School, it's only overtly talked about always. The way that they lived, about how they lived, and the way they lived. I mean, anti-war poem, war is shit. To me, it's almost more about the lifestyle. You know, they sort of took from the beats the kind of dropout thing, live on little money, live outside these institutions, live outside these kind of corporate Moloch type things that just swallow people up. And the poet especially, is supposed to be some kind of alive, wild flower or something amongst, you know, the landscape architecture. Whereas now, I mean, people my age, it just seems like they want healthcare system. They, you know, and to some degree, it's like, it's hard to be outside the system, right? Like, one of the things that allowed these poets to live the way they lived was because of the Great Society and things left over from the New Deal. Welfare, rent control, things that don't exist anymore. Things that the 80s and Reagan and everything since then have taken all the government protections off and sort of jacked up the financialization of everything. Credit, and so you can't, you sort of have to go into the system. It's very hard to live outside the system. But I will say, I think that the people who live outside the system, you know, traditionally have been valorized, or at least like that has been looked on as sort of a heroic thing in our literature. People who were kind of outsider, did it themselves, made their own name. I don't know, Jack London. Mark Twain maybe went to San Francisco. You know, Mark Twain was not necessarily, you know, Whitman was not really accepted. He self-published. Emily Dickinson lived in a fucking closet basically her whole life. Edgar Allan Poe, look at that fucking nutcase. I mean, he was a little bit a part of, you know, he wrote for magazines and got paid and shit like that, but you know, I don't really think he fit in, let's say. I mean, those are just the kind of traditional examples. Kerouac, right? Somebody that walked away kind of from traditional publishing. He didn't want to write. His whole thing was kind of fighting against the kind of big book publishing industry style. He didn't want to write. He didn't want to work his sentences. That they were just this kind of dead calcified, like numb thing or something. I think he didn't want to live that way too, right? And I think there's definitely something to be said for that in poetry. I think so boringly married to like these boring poems and these boring lives and like academia. It's like it's just so boring. Like nothing against like Carlos. I just don't find it that exciting. I don't know. Not to single him out, there's most of the academic writers I find are like that. They're flat. Or like they're dull. I don't know. They're not exciting. That's academic style. It's just boring. It's slow. It's like old fashioned. I don't even fucking know who. Some fantasy idea about Ted Hughes or something. There are ways to respond to the culture. This is a big, as I've been right? You're not a real writer. I don't even get respect from like my thing, right? Like my mom constantly looking down. It's just not real. I'm not. It's like I've got more time and experience doing this than when I go to these open mics and when I go to fucking Poetry Project, people look at me with respect. That's something I earned. It's not something I got from an MFA program or from being in the New Yorker or something. It's like, that's because I bring it. And I learned how to do it by doing it in real life. In libraries, in bookstores, in bars, at open mics. And so, like, I've been trying to fit in with this kind of establishment literary world and kind of find my clout, right, there. And yet, when I do this, the places that I actually, like, admire or, like, where I find anything everywhere. And you can almost always tell where somebody went to school. I can tell where somebody went to school practically every fucking time. And that is like a red flag to me. That's why I have a fucking MFA. Because, like, I know what Columbia people sound like. I've met a lot of MFA people in the last week, too. So I've had a lot of conversations about it. And, I don't just want some kind of house style, and I don't want to sound like some older poet is just teaching me to write like them. That's the other thing, is like I feel like a lot of people just sound like they're teachers. And like it's taken me a long time, and I'm more or less an autodidact. I don't really do workshops. Nobody really gives me specific feedback on my writing, other than like just things they'll say in passing, like at a bar or something. And it's usually positive. Nobody's like, recently, I'm not getting, like, critiques as far as, like, the way that people workshop stuff. I haven't done that in a long time. I've been in workshops from time to time, but, like, I haven't really done that in a long time. I'm not saying that that's bad, but, like, I think reading it in public is kind of its own. And to be honest, I mean, during the whole Trump years, and like I was being political shit, I was only doing it was was super popular. But like I was teaching myself, and that's what I've done, right? No one really has taught me very much of anything. And I don't, I know that my stuff is not really publishable in traditional things, but like I can't do it any other way. This is the best I can do. And there's enough things that I gain by doing it stylistically the way that I want to do it, that like I don't want to write like these other people. I read the way they fucking write. I read the way Brennan Constantine writes. I read the way, you know, there's a lot of writers who I have way, massive, massive, massive respect for, and I try to learn from. This book, this stuff is sort of interesting. This is my fucking MFA right here. Not a to an MFA even know what reading books are. They probably reading and shit like that. Alice Notley, Victor Hernandez Cruz, Dave Meltzer, James Broughton, James Sherry. I like that book a lot. Jonathan Williams, pretty interesting. Paul Metcalf, pretty interesting. Brendan Lorber, of course. Brendan Lorber's Lungful magazine. Janine Palmy Vega. Quentin Crisp, of course. It's so well. The point is to not be seriously. I think this is another corporation's coverage. They're trying to crack out the wild creativity in this country in a way. They want everything to send in the door working for kind of like, and it's just ironic because these robots, they're being like politically subversive by being woke or whatever, and I don't know. It's just like I don't know. There are aspects of that, I guess. Maybe it is an exciting time for literature. Like, I don't. There are certain aspects of like the woke culture where it does become like fast food or something for like white guilt people, like Roxane Gay. To be honest, like a lot of the more high profile, like I think Hanif Abdur, a lot of his stuff is like that too. It's sort of capitalizing on what you want to be hit, being guilty shit, and what a bad thing, like not, you know, there are certain people that are getting a lot of credit for being maybe better writers than they are. Let's just say that. And that I mean, you don't have to write like an old white guy to be a fucking great writer. I'm not that. But like, a lot of making these decisions in the public industry and shit are just, they're like Arrested Development, Disney-ized fucking like, rich, privileged. They are privileged. It's they went to like these expensive schools that like push. It's part of the somebody that does the idea of it's not cool when I show up. This kind of broy white straight guy, like, I'm not queer. I'm not trans. I'm not, and I don't have anything against all right. The frustration more just comes from being secluded, especially the last few years of just being. It's just felt like the finger's been pointing at you. Toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity. I'm looking at you. All of my viewers. I looked at my demographic. It's all like, I think it's all like 35 to 44-year-old males. It was literally like 100% male. I don't get it. I don't know. That's a whole other fucking thing. I guess it is part of it, as being like, women are great readers and they're great writers. Like, I think it's exciting to like, to it shouldn't be a bunch of alcoholic white philanderers and Norman Mailers and shit. Like, that is gross, and I'm not that either. But also, okay, like, another angle on this is like the Sam Pink guy, right? He's an example of, I don't know if he has an MFA, I'm not sure. I don't think so. But he sort of gained a foothold for himself sort of outside. But I would say he kind of tokenizes himself in the same way. I'm not that familiar with his writing. I looked at it a little bit. To be honest, it wasn't really my cup of tea. It's just like he goes way overboard with like the dialect thing in a way that just like, that's what I mean. It's like he's like the hillbilly. They want like some kind of provincial, like they need those kind of figures too. They need people that they think are Faulkner or whatever. Like Scott McClanahan is like that. He's from West Virginia and he's got this like male kind of like masculine, like you get the impression he loves to drink like bourbon and his sentences are like kind of like that. They're like straight and simple, and I've read a little bit of this stuff here and there. It hasn't really knocked me out. To be honest, I think there's more exciting shit. The most exciting literature that I've discovered in the past decade has been the New York school shit, to be honest. And like, young people are writing like they're in the 1930s or something. Like Scott McClanahan, as far as I can tell, the same fucking thing. Look at Bret Easton Ellis novel, as far as I'm concerned. He's doing Bret Easton Ellis. It's essentially the same thing. It's like, and Bret Easton Ellis is kind of doing Hemingway. It's like, it's they're doing all kinds of different shit. That's exciting. But it's also working class. I think that's something, okay, that's something that the guy claims in the interview that I don't necessarily know that I agree with. He said hated demographic or whatever is the white working class, the white male working class. Which I'm not sure if I'd go that far. But he goes out of his way to talk about like the opioid crisis, people overdosing, how all these, poor white people, basically, rural. And like, I spent the whole pandemic in Ohio, right? I saw it firsthand. I know it. And like, it is a little bit ironic being told you're privileged when like, people were regularly dropping dead of like ODing and shit. My mom would go to Middletown, the guy next door OD'd. And then a few months later, the same fucking thing happened. And then this other person OD'd on heroin. It was just like, a lot of people OD, and they still are. That's white people. And Trump, right? A lot of the Trump train was fueled by that very thing. With you know, how are they going to tell that story? Is fucking Hillbilly Elegy, that's that story? You know, I do think it's fucked up. Me, I'm somebody that's from the middle of this country. Yeah, I put a lot of time and effort into trying to like make my way into the New York world. Sort of find my own wits. And I didn't go to any, I worked for one. Uh, and yet, sports are not really looking for me. And I wouldn't like attribute it to that fact, anything, but like also people aren't go out of their way, let's say. Like, it's amazing I've been able to do this for this long, actually, to be honest. I've just gotten lucky. Doing things outside institutions, people, you know, magazines, whatever should, you know, like it's open, right? Maybe been kind of like surprised. It's something that has a little more like platform because it's an institution. It's KGR. It's people. It's a brand. It's a name. It's in New York. It's in the center of fucking the fucking world, right? That's a powerful thing. This fucking wrestling bio. I've been watching all these wrestling bio videos about the first episode of Monday Night Raw, and they were talking about before Raw. They traditionally had these taped shows, squash match, Saturday night's main event or whatever. Raw was like they needed something that was live every week where they could have current storylines and storylines. Before that, they didn't really do that. They'd have the pay-per-view, which you watch. And they wanted to be in New York City because New York is like the center of the business, right? Madison Square Garden is the center of, that's like the apex of the wrestling world. And so it wasn't at Madison Square Garden, it was at Manhattan Center, which is down the street. But I'm down the street from Madison Square Garden, of course. And the KGB thing is like, you could describe it as being exactly the same thing in my life. It's a weekly live show in the center of the business, let's say, right? And you know, that's not really why I'm not trying to take advantage. Like, that's not why, you know, it's not an opportunistic thing for me. It's just logistically, it is the spot. And I'm loving it. I mean, it really, you know, I think it's kismet. But it also is something that I just sort of fell ass backwards into, as far as it's having a little more platform, like I said, than I anticipated. Because it is a public sort of literary meeting place. I can't. There's probably not even that many of those that you can name in this country at this point, particularly ones that are not institutional in any way at all. I mean, that's what I thought the Poetry Project was. That's why I volunteered to get involved there, because I thought the Poetry Project was like, if you don't want to get an MFA, but you want the best MFA you could possibly get, go to the Poetry Project. And like, it's not as open. It is victim of the same thing, and it's plagued by the same thing that all these other institutions are. It's just become another one of those, where it's all this gatekeeping. It's grant applications, it's portals, and it's just like you have to get into that club somehow. Like, and they just follow the trends. They just do the same fucking trendy shit everybody else is doing. And it's like, if you aren't getting a high score on that intersectional scorecard, like, forget about it. I'm lucky to even be there at all, to be honest. Like, I digress. Point being, I felt like I given them a lot, and other than just like seeing the events, they don't like they don't really invite you into stuff. It's not that kind of place. Like you need to make things happen, and I just am not good at that, or haven't been good at that. Whereas like a lot of those relationships are tied up with the MFA thing and with these kind of relationships that are monetized and financialized through MFA and through these kind of weird mentorships and grants and publishing linkages and that kind of stuff, book contests, who gets to be the interns, who gets hired, who has power. And so, like, in a certain way, you know, you can't go to people like asking for that. You can't be like, hey, can you make me a big deal? You know, like, and so I know for me, it's like there's not really any proof in the pudding. Like, I don't have anything that's really gone viral. You know, I don't have 3,000 followers. You know, like, I haven't won some big contest. I haven't published. I don't really get invited to do readings hardly very much. That's started to happen a little bit, but most of the poetry downtown falls victim to the same shit as it's just lame. It's just lame and overly earnest and just it's not fun or entertaining or like actually deep or anything. It's just like a guilt trip and just like boring fake still lives and fake nature bullshit. Not even nature. Not even nature. Nature would be good. What was I just talking about? Oh, and so in a way, I feel like the KGB thing could be that for me. It's like, here's a place where, like, you know, okay, you know, Poetry Project is probably not gonna ever ask me to do anything other than just work for them. And so how long am I just going to stand there just like out in the rain or whatever, you know? Whereas there's something to be said for like, if you start to make something happen for yourself, right? That's when like the good luck happens. And I've always busted my ass and I've always been doing work. It's just, it's not always this visible and it doesn't always, you know, there's not always like the wind at your back. I mean, particularly the last few years with Trump and everything, it's just like nothing has really been that in my favor necessarily. I mean, I don't know. You know, there are obstacles, let's say, or like things working against you that are definitely factors that maybe weren't as apparent before or present. What was the point of saying that? But I was always busy and I was always doing shit. You know, the parties that I threw would have as many people as the open mics. I'd have artists, I'd book artists, but it's like it was just a party. I didn't like post a bunch of pictures of it on the internet to try to get likes and to try to get people to see how good it was. Whereas like this open mic, because it's at this place that people know about, all of a sudden people are like, I've had multiple people come up to me and be like, you're doing a good thing. You're doing a great thing, you know, and like sort of congratulate me on it that weren't congratulating me on anything before. Like, you know, I've been running readings, I've been hosting readings since 2014. And like this one, to be honest, is not any more successful than like the Sludge stuff that was happening, or the portal parties, or the last resort parties. Like, they were basically the same thing, more or less. There'd be 50 people there just vibing out on the artists, you know? And I'm discerning and tasteful. There's a lot of bad art in New York. I definitely know good poets. I generally do not make friends with people whose poetry I don't like that much. Maybe that's not true. I don't know. I try to make it a point to talk to the people that I liked after the reading. Uh, and I always make a splash. That's why it's frustrating. Well, to continue to walk into the situation like nobody, and you're constantly. I feel like I haven't even started yet. I feel like I'm still just like haven't even reached the beginning. But it's also a place where these poets can meet each other. I'm not locked into this conversation I was having the other night with these two poets who have MFAs. They were just talking about how they didn't really know each other outside their cohort, and they were kind of like trying to meet people outside. And it's like, well, that I don't really have that because I had to learn how to socialize. That's one of the things I learned in New York and on the streets, for real. And like that's what I can do that MFA people can't do is like, I blow it a lot of the time, but like at open mics and shit, I'm pretty able to meet anybody and like make friends and shit. And so, I've met a lot of poets from the Shades of Green open mic, the Neuronautic open mic, Brendan Lorber I've met through various things. People through Project come to the reading. People from the Dead Pete's Society come to the reading. People from, like Brooklyn Poets come to the fucking reading, even though I haven't been to that one in a while because it costs too much money. So I'm also part of these other worlds, and so that's another thing that like the MFA people don't really, that's not really a part of a writing program. Is like I'm kind of trying to mix all these things together and put it on as a show, and like it's in New York and it's a big primetime thing, and like that takes a lot of guts to do that every fucking week and like publicize it, host it. Who has time for that? Especially in the economic circumstance we're in right now, it's like nobody has time or money to do this because anybody who's poor would have to work so hard that they just wouldn't have the energy. Me, it's like I've taken the time over the past however long to go to comedy shows, play these music open mics, go to tons of poetry shit, go to other people's readings, go to theater stuff. And so I'm trying to bring all these people, hang flyers up everywhere, And so KGB is kind of a convenient, it's like, the Manhattan Center was for Monday Night Raw. It's like, as far as, like I said, non-institutional public literary salons, let's call it. And it's a reading series, right? That's a big part of what any literary institution does. It runs a fucking reading series. So I get to run a reading series, but it's also I get to have other performers and people show up based on whatever frequency they're on, and if they vibe with it, and if they think they'll and so interesting people come out, and it was a hell of a show, actually. Talented people. A lot of fucking MFA people doing that. And yet, if I had to apply for an MFA program, I don't know what the fuck I'd send them. I don't really write that way. I just wish I could get the fucking degree so I could teach. That's the frustrating part. Is like, I'd love to do that for a job because I don't want to have to get a job, really. And I'd love to just teach poetry, right? And so that's another thing that I want to do with my series, right? So thinking about this stuff and thinking about alternatives and thinking about this reading series, it's like, how can I make the reading series like a university? How can I make it, how can I teach people about poetry? How can I be a professor of poetry? I've got this audience. That's basically what a professor is. You know, lecturing, that's more or less like comedy. It's basically stand-up. And so I don't know how long this is going to last, but I'm trying to think about ways that I can expand it and how can I maximize it? What's the purpose of it? How can I make it more exciting? How can I make it more groundbreaking? I mean, I do think this is the kind of stuff that will like make it like a must-see show. Like, this is a poetry university. You know, I think about Paul Blackburn. He was kind of like one of the I don't know if I'd say like original, like, you know, precursor. He ran a couple reading series, but one at this point. Maybe he didn't run that one, but he taped it. He would take his tape recorder everywhere, and so I can relate. I have a deep Paul Blackburn kind of connection, in a way that's probably kind of misguided, but I feel like I'm kind of like a reincarnation of Paul Blackburn anyway, because he ran these series and he like. He would put all these poets on, and he published a little magazine of the poets at the series that they'd hand out at the series. But he was a professor and a translator. He'd go to Europe, and he was a troubadour. He translated a lot of like the troubadour poetry, and so he really kind of did that in life. You know, he knew all these poets. He went to a lot of readings. He recorded the readings. His tapes, the Paul Blackburn archives, are at the University of California, San Diego, and they're kind of this legendary trove of all these readings and shit, because he'd go to all these, and so that's kind of what I do, right, with my videos, is, maybe I should try to get that fucking reading up, going and recording readings, and trying to project them, you know, into the future, trying to project them into further viewership, you know. Whoever this calls to can access it down through the years, through the internet. I mean, the internet didn't even exist at that fucking time, right? I don't think he had an MFA exactly. I'm not sure if that really existed, but or did he go to college? He didn't go to Black Mountain, but he had associations with Black Mountain. And kind of, I don't know, the big publishing credentials you need to, like, he was a teacher, and he got grants to go translate and travel and things like that, too. You know, I'm not against that stuff. But I do think it's something that should be discussed, the way that, like, what was it? It said something like there were 66 or 64 MFA programs in, like, 1990 or something, and now there's, like, over 200 or something. I don't remember the exact numbers. There's all these low residency MFA programs. It's like, it's definitely shaping the literature. And I think as just like a critic or like a writer, one should be paying attention to. And I definitely, I mean, to be honest, like the readings that I've gone to, poetry project over the past couple years, like most of them were not that interesting to me, just from like a stylistic point of view. And I don't know that I would attribute that to the MFA thing really specifically. But just like kind of like what the way that like the literary game has just been like sewn up, and it's just like this weird like society thing. It's just like all these people like trading like relationships and clout, and it's, you have to get buy-in somehow. But it's also now it's about the lens of your identity. That's like at the forefront of it. Specifically, a non-white, non-male, non-hetero. Uh, Woke intolerance. It's intersectional means everything but what I am. Everything that you are. Inclusivity, it means everybody but you. Everybody but the white guys. Inclusivity means everybody but the white guys. We're inclusive, meaning no white guys. This is a safe space for everybody but and you can't even like at it. It's like with the mic, I try to make it a safe space. I try to make it inclusive and diverse without necessarily going out of my way to like it just feels like everything leads with that now. And I just think like I can be a part of that by featuring a diversity. Well, that's what I'm doing. It's like it is an alternative to everything that I'm talking about. It's an alternative to the university kind of like you have to go this way, meaning like you get on stage, you read your poem, you meet other writers, you talk to them, you hear other writers. It is a university. It is a workshop. It's just it's not in a credentialed fucking wood paneled room or whatever at a big table, but it is a workshop, essentially. It's where artists can come and like share their work, whatever they want, and get a reaction. They'll get feedback. They'll see what works. They'll see what doesn't. It's just frustrating because it's just the only fucking thing anybody cares about is it tied to a school? Is it tied to an institution? Were there famous people there? Like, how many people liked it? Trying to break in with none of that stuff, purely on talent alone. I haven't done myself any favors by doing the music stuff. That's another, and this is like completely off topic. This is a whole topic. This is more just for me. I kind of get annoyed when people watch. To be honest, like a lot of time, like a few people have signed into this, and when they get on, I get really nervous, and I'm kind of like, just go away. It's just so much pressure when only one person. You're like, oh my god, I need to do something immediately, or they're gonna stop watching, and then they stop, and you're like, oh god, there goes my audience. You feel like, oh, I've got a person, I can build on this. Fuck them. I'd rather just do it myself. If people want to watch it later, they can watch it later. This hasn't necessarily been my most organized. I feel like I could say this better, all of this, but I'm kind of all over the place. The music stuff, like, I'm good at hosting. I found my true calling. I'm a host. I'm fine with that. Give me Howie Mandel's job. Give me Howie Mandel's job, or Nick Cannon's job. I'm ready to be Nick Cannon. Make me Nick Cannon. Come on. I'm in New York. Execs, I know you're out there. I got to make this show like a thing. Because, like, it's my shot. And I'm trying to grow it, you know? But I think, this is something I maybe want to talk about tomorrow. I want to, like, during the show, take a little time for myself to just kind of, like, do a little 3-minute essay or something and just share some thoughts. After the 10 o'clock, what I'm thinking about doing is maybe we'll go to 10 and then take a break, and then the people that want to stay can stay. That's when the tape cuts off, and, like, people do need to get drinks again. And a lot of people leave at 10 anyway. So maybe 10, 15, take a break, and then come back and finish up. That's a thought. It's an idea. But in any case, at all these other open mics, I'm kind of beholden to what's the vibe, what's the audience like, or I got to kind of read something that's good, that maybe they're gonna like, or else they're gonna make fun of me or something, which has happened. I think that's part of, like, the struggle as a writer and as a poet. I mean, especially, is, like, the validation of your identity as that. In MFA, it's a stamp on you that in your average person's eyes, you are a poet. You're able to be booked at stuff. You're able to teach. You're able to go out to dinner and get health insurance and be bourgeois. And if you're not an MFA, you're just like a joke. It's just like a hobby. It's just like you probably have a day job, and, like, you go to open mics with a bunch of other poets and go to book readings with a bunch of other poets, and I don't know. I mean, I think sex appeal is tied to it a lot. A lot of the, like, hot young writers, a lot of the people that get into these programs, they're trying to make stars. And these people are ambitious. They're calculating. It's just not interesting to me that, like, it's all getting into Columbia. Negotiating that, I'm sure, is interesting. And getting ahead there, standing out there, is probably not easy. But, as somebody who's like a scruff, an outsider, trying to do it the old-fashioned way, just, like, by making it through talent, like my heroes in show business, Bob Dylan or whatever, moved to New York and start performing on McDougal Street, or Baker, or East 4th, or all of the above, East 14th, Williamsburg, everywhere. Just trying to make a noise, trying to make furor. Furor. Any way I can. Self-publishing. It took me a long time to even figure that out. I've been very lucky to have these last couple of years with all the resources and all in this position. I live like a rich person. If I were rich, I could continue to do this forever. But I'm Cinderella. I'm Cinderella boy. I thought that the New York school people would be more sympathetic to that, and they'd like, maybe help me out. And the last few years have made it harder than, it would have been otherwise. People are not really eager to accept. Like, things are cooling off. especially recently, I think. That's one reason why I think this interview has sort of gone viral, this Hobart interview, because now people we're enough away from kind of the heat of the Trump thing that like people are starting to go like, what the fuck, this woke intolerance and this kind of like, it's just a bunch of rich elite privileged white women in Brooklyn and like there was this quote on the back of this book I had, Conversations with Don DeLillo, and Don DeLillo is like my favorite of those novelists of that era of male white guys. Something about the writer, it's the writer's, I'm paraphrasing badly here, so this is not what he said in his words at all, but it's something like this. It's like, writers want to join the establishment. This was like in the 80s, probably the late 80s, writers today want to join the establishment more than ever, but like, it's the writer's job to like live in the margins and like go further into those kind of areas, the edges, where the outsiders are, not the literary cocktail world necessarily of New York City. I think that's an interesting justification. But at the same time, if I look at the writers, certain writers were models for me, I think specifically because, like, Rollins was somebody who kind of took a similar philosophy. Although, is Rollins really an outsider? I'm not sure. He's in Hollywood movies, he's on MTV, is he an outsider? He feels that way, but he's been on SNL and shit. I mean, a lot of the writers, or artists or whatever, the people I wanted to pattern my life after, Werner Herzog, Wallace Shawn, they were kind of outsider is Wallace Shawn outsider? His dad's the editor of the New Yorker. I mean, what could be more inside than that? But his stance as a playwright, you got some sense that he was like a little bit of an outsider as an avant-garde playwright. People didn't necessarily respond that well to his plays. But anyway, like, the idea that writers should be outsiders, like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, the outsiders. On the outside looking out is what Rollins says. He's not on the outside looking in, he's on the outside looking out. Henry Miller. Is Henry Miller an outsider? Was Kerouac an outsider? I mean, Kerouac went to Columbia. Was Hart Crane an outsider? Was Ted Berrigan an outsider? I mean, part of why Ted Berrigan is such a crucible is because he was from Providence, Rhode Island, working class Irish. He was in the Army, and he went to college on the GI Bill. He got a master's degree. So he was an academic. I mean, he was a professor. He taught. But he also had this other life in New York where he was a beatnik, essentially, and lived kind of hand-to-mouth, borrowing money from people, and he was a poet 4 hours a day, right? That's probably the biggest thing you take, or, I don't know, not to quantify it, but like one of the biggest lessons from Ted Berrigan, from the Teddy Bear School of Poetry, is it's a 24-hour day job. It's a 24/7 job. It's not some little thing you do in the drawer at work. You live as a poet. You talk to poets. You walk as a poet. You walk through the world as a poet. You eat as a poet. You dine as a poet. You read as a poet. You work as a poet. You go to your friends' readings. You publish your friends. You talk about poetry with your friends. You go to galleries with your friends. You go to the park. You absorb the light. You go to the river. etc., etc. It's a 24-hour job, right? I don't know if an MFA program really teaches you that. You know, these were things that it took me a decade to just like absorb kind of piece by piece through my own luck of circumstance, for one thing, but also just like going to Poet's House, I would say, is predominantly where I learned most of what I know. Because you can just go there and look at the books, and they have most of what you need to see. And so, you know, New York School, it's not easy to find those books, right? In Columbus, Ohio, you're not going to find necessarily that stuff. And even if you do, it's not really going to make any sense. You kind of have to be here to fully kind of like understand what the fuck the point of it is. That's not to say I think that style kind of travels. One of the things about this new Ted Berrigan book I'm really interested in is there's translation of, I think, Basho travel haiku journals, Near Road to the Deep North. I'm not sure if it's that one specifically, but it's like one of those books. So I'm interested to see Ted Berrigan's translations of the haikus. They seem really good from what I was looking at. They seem like amazing, actually. But I can see how that influenced the way that he wrote and the way that he lived. You know, the haiku thing, it's like they're journaling the whole time. They're writing haikus as they travel in notebooks. They're having haiku contests. It's an autofiction, if you want to call it that. But it's very New York School because it's like, it's a journal presence. I mean, there's an aspect of New York School that I would say is Zen, you could call it that, as far as like presence, noticing your surroundings, naming your surroundings, being where you actually are, and using the language of that as style is part of that. Speaking in contemporary tone, colloquial, and you know, the way it looks on the page, syntax and grammar, I think is part of that presence and being fully where you are and fully in life, right? I think that's a big part of it. The poetry and the life is in the poem. The poem is about the life, and the poem kind of enhances the life. The poem is a way of straightening up the life and arranging it sculpturally, kind of perceptually, narratively, conceptually, visually, through language, in the moment. It's like taking a drink of wine or something, except you just do it with your brain. And so the way that, the sonnets definitely do that, but Ted Berrigan's work was always kind of like in different ways. It was in step with his life, and it was coming out of his life, and vice versa. There was like this weave, I think, between him writing about what was happening and him living like a poem and talking a poem. Everybody talks about what an incredible talker Ted Berrigan was, which we don't really see that much. There's not very much footage of that. There's not very much recordings of that, at least that I'm aware of. And living as a poet, living poetically, that was something I was interested in. I used to carry this fucking list on my wall that I wrote, I think, in high school, probably when I was like 16, maybe. And it was just things that it may have even been called things to do. I don't know. I'd love to see this list, but it was just all these like little goals and just like, ways. And one of them was, it was shit like live poetically, move like a dancer was one of them. Kind of cheesy. It was like very Chaplin-esque. That was like my idea of poetry, was to be like sort of a Chaplin, tramp figure, dancing kind of through the world, and your life is kind of this physical comedy, but it's graceful and it's a ballet. I mean, every movement, right? could be part of a dance. I think New York kind of shows you that. New York is this big dance at all times. And part of the poetry of that is every movement has beauty and meaning. And it's not just throwaway. It's not just, oh, I'm trying to, think about the beauty of bodies walking through the streets or dodging each other or, getting into taxis. There's a lot of beauty sculpturally and rhythmically. And even though it's this, um, you know, purposeful, functional activity. Um, and so, I don't know. I found poetry to be the most authentic source of, uh, like, real life, actually. Like, I've found the best way to, like, conjure magic out of, like, what's actually around you. Everything else feels kind of like hyper over sensitized, over produced, over. It's like there's too much stimulation, there's too much uh, clean cut narrative, there's too much flavor enhancement, there's too much artificial chemicals, and just manipulation. Things that make you passive, things that make you render you kind of like, I don't know, a helpless kind of like victim as a receiver or as a viewer, as an audience person. Poetry is more of a way of like turning you on, showing you what's real, I think, than anything else that I've found. That's not to say that there isn't poetry in a lot of movies or music or what have you, TV shows. But I think people reading each other poetry is probably actually like one of the oldest things that human beings even do actually. It might even be the oldest. Like poetry readings are probably like the oldest continuously going form of like show business or entertainment. I would, it just feels very ancient to me. We could have been doing this 5,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. Sitting and listening. I love it. And so the open mic is an auditorium and a lecture hall. And it's a place to be. As I go to these open mics, I don't know if it's just because I'm older or what. Maybe it's just because of the experience that I have. But like people look at me like I'm like their professor or something. Like they're looking at me like I and I'm equally trying to like listen and learn from other people and see what's out there. Um, Part of it is just like when I go to the open mic and I announce like, oh, I host this open mic every Monday at KGB bar. People go, whoa, shit, like because it's like I said, it's got this brand recognition. Everybody knows it. People that want to seem smart, right? They have positive associations or like they're going to react positively to KGB bar because it's just like, oh, cool, yeah, KGB, I'm cool, I'm smart. That's the lit bar. Yeah, I've been there. I go to readings or like, most people probably don't go to a lot of readings, but I want the open mic to be something that the most hardcore poetry fans can come to and be like, whoa, this was great reading. But also, like, your average person can come to and be like, whoa, this is a great show. And I think, I think we kind of hit that. Like, I'm proud of the people who come and read poetry at the open mic. Like, I like what they do. And I'm honored that they come to share. I've been meeting a lot of poets this summer. And, like, generally, like I said, I really key in with people that I think are good. I'm like, I've gotten like a little bit of a reputation just through my Twitter, which, to be honest, I think my Twitter's ruined my career. My Twitter like completely like cratered my chances with anybody. And I don't even remember saying that much shit about being anti-MFA, because to be honest, like, I'm only against it because those people get to feel special about themselves, and the rest of us, like, I feel like Oliver Twist, like I'm just sitting here with my bowl and there's nothing in it. And I don't know, am I a lazy writer? Do I deserve? Is my writing not good? Am I just trying to take a bunch of shortcuts? That could all be true, Should factor all that in, that possibility. Like this. Is this a shortcut? It is a shortcut, I think. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's contemporary. Writers should try to be contemporary. Like, the way that writers try to be contemporary is by fitting in with, like, these issues and these identity politic kind of roles. Like, I don't think there is room, if you want to be, like, on the literary, like, it is a club, and like, you have to play by their rules. And it has formulated in our generation via these kind of like intersectional guidelines. Now, that's to say that, like, you can't, there's possibility, I think, although our culture is not necessarily looking for like the next great white guy writer, let's say. But, I mean, if you look at people like Rollins, fucking the people I mentioned before, Rollins doesn't have a fucking MFA. I mean, he was a celebrity. But, like, as far as his literary efforts go, I think he's a good writer, and, like, I think he is a serious reader, and he self-publishes shit. He's got his spoken word thing. So, like, when I think of writers from that era, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, there's not that many people that I would say that I enjoyed their books as much as Rollins's, actually. Like, I think Rollins is as good as anything that happened in those decades, literarily. Of his generation, let's say. Like, maybe Rollins as good as Don DeLillo? He's kind of intense in a way that I think is, because we have this industry that is kind of like, these people are like prudes. I think that's part of, like, the politics, is like, they are kind of inexperienced because they've been in college their whole lives and they've been pampered in New York, taking Ubers everywhere and going to fucking book parties, thinking they're like radicals, thinking they're fucking Angela Davis or something, or Audre Lorde. It's like, no, you pay $400 a week to take your dog like a fucking babysitter, like, you take Ubers everywhere, like, you're pampered as fuck, like, people like that are usually the most interesting on the, like, something like William T. Bowman I was thinking about recently. I'm not that familiar with his work. I don't know if he has an MFA, but like, you know, he doesn't live in New York. I think he lives in California somewhere in the Bay Area. But like, you know, his writing is like he's hot at trains and shit. You know, he goes to these extreme kind of like Vice magazine. You know, he'll go to Afghanistan or something and write fucking, or he almost killed or something, right? Didn't he, in Eastern Europe? Or, you know, he does like extreme shit, but he was doing that like in the 80s and 90s. You know, New York used to be an extreme place where it was like scary to even be here. So that, I'm sure, weeded a lot of people out. It's like now the softest people are in control of everything, you know? And I'm not like one of these people that like, I don't think you have to be like a hard ass or anything to run shit, but like, it's a little bit hard to swallow when like these like elite, pampered, rich people are like lecturing pedantically and enforcing this kind of like culture. Really, they're restricting the culture to like this like medicine they're trying to get us to take, and it's like it's bad for the writing, right? You know, you don't have to write. I mean, I'm all for if you want to talk about like your immigrant experience and shit. Like, I'm all for that. That's great. But like, you can write about whatever the fuck you want. Write a book about a white guy. I'd love to hire one of these writers to write a book about me. Maybe I can get him to do the next year of my show. Let me get like the most woke ass. Who could I get? I don't know. I don't even want to speculate on it. Because I don't want to seem intolerant. It's just like, and I'm not. I just want a, you know, I just want to be not like hated when I go to the event. You know, like it'd be nice if there were some like I think I could be like a hero of the alternative. Here's how to be like a good white guy. And like, look at this guy. He's, you know, he's sort of an American maverick. You know, like Top Gun, self-publishing. We thought that this was, you know, over. We thought this whole, you know, type of thing. But you know, people are not really giving me the benefit of the doubt. No one's really looking hard at what I'm doing. And so, like, it would be easy to dismiss, even though, you know, just because you're a white guy or whatever. But I think I've done a lot of interesting things already that no one has paid attention to. That's not because I'm a white guy, but it is, you know, it's the optics also play into like getting an audience and social media following and whatnot as well. And so that's just another thing. If you have an MFA, a social media following, and this and that, you have a career going on that somebody like me, it's like, even though I am a literary citizen, I know a lot of good writers. I published good writers, you know. A lot of people like my work. A lot of people I respect like it. And, okay, I don't have a fucking MFA. My history with that is long and painful. I flirted with it a couple times. I've been thinking about it more recently. If there were another way, you know, my original dream was like I would become like Sam Shepard or fucking Dave Eggers or something, where it's like I'd be such a like universally acknowledged writer that like universities would just hire me because it's like, well, it's fucking Sam Shepard. You know, of course you're going to hire him. And I still got my fingers crossed that that's going to happen. I think my project is media worthy. And that's how this shit happens, unfortunately. It's like you got to go one of these ways. You know, you got to get an audience somehow. Like, either you got to get, like, famous. Like, James Franco can publish all the fucking books he wants, right? And he can do a talk with Frank Bidart at, like, the Chicago fucking Humanities Festival about poetry because he's James Franco. if he was me, he'd be doing what I'm doing, trying to break into the industry. But yeah, my dream is still to be one of those people. That's what I've worked for. And it does kind of take longer, I feel like, for those people. Like, if you look at Werner Herzog, right? It's only in the past few years that he's become like a household name. Like, when I first heard of Werner Herzog probably in like 2009 or something, and like I was really into his shit like around that time. And nobody really knew who he was. You know, he was like still like an obscure, you know, European director or something. But now it's like everybody does the voice. They know through YouTube clips and stuff. He's just such a magnetic storyteller and orator that he's become this kind of like meme, right? But it took him like many decades. He's been making movies since the fucking 60s, right? I hope that doesn't happen to me. But, I mean, it's frustrating when even people who like work in the media, like the New York Times, like this writer who works for the New York Times who came to the reading a couple weeks ago. She had come to this reading that I did on Park Avenue in 2015, and she said we were broetry. You know, this is somebody that works for the New York Times. We were immediately dismissed because of that. Not that they were going to write an article about us, but like, not everything is that cut and dried. And like, you'd like to believe that the people at like the paper of record or the New Yorker magazine see things with like more nuance than that. Or like more depth, or like weren't thinking necessarily in those kind of like just complete cultural buzzwords. Or, and yet I feel that way with the New Yorker too. It's like, it's frustrating because it's like, those are, as a writer, right, like there's a few mastheads that like they are the ultimate kind of like stamp of like you've arrived, or like credibility or validation, verification. You know, the New York Times, if you get a, and to be honest, it's just frustrating to me that like the reviews have more power than the fucking books. Because, and this is something you see in theater, but everything. It's like the review will make or break your piece. If you get a rave review, you're a hit. If you if you get like on the road, get a rave review in the New York Times, it said he's a genius or whatever. I don't know. It's like all of a sudden Kerouac is a cultural sensation. Nobody knew who he was. You know, plays and shit. If you get a bad review, your play will close. That's how much power they have. They will put you out of business. And especially in this town, it's like the New York Times. If you get in the New Yorker, serious people take that shit seriously. And their eyes are on it. And so it's like, what can you do? It's like the ultimate gold star. You know, we're the gifted kids. We want to be told we're smart. We want to be told we're talented. We want all, you know, we want to be in Poetry Magazine, the Paris Review, the New Yorker. You got to get those out of the way, right away. But to me, it's like those institutions, they don't mean what they did, actually. Like, a lot of the quality has gone out. And I don't attribute that to wokeness specifically. I think wokeness is just one aspect of like corporatization, privatization. You know, when you do that to education, when you sew up like the class lines in the cities, the way the cities are organized, you can't move to New York as just like, you know, James Thurber, fucking Harold Ross, right? The first editor of the New Yorker was just like this fucking redneck. He like, what was he, from Colorado or Utah or something? It was like, I don't even know if he had any kind of formal education. But it was like, he worked for newspapers and, he worked his way up. And then he started the fucking New Yorker. Harold Ross. But you get the impression it's like he was kind of like wild ignoramus or something. Not ignorant, but, literary character, or, like these, it's just so politically correct. I feel like even the functions are just not any fun. Going to the parties and stuff, these people are so buttoned up. They're so like, and I don't know, like smart white women have just, they study, they read everything, they do everything by the book. That doesn't necessarily make them like, just because your reading comprehension is like perfect on the fucking SATs does not necessarily make you like the best critic. Like there's more to it than to how you synthesize art, to how you think about what they're actually doing. It's a sensibility thing, it's a sensitivity thing, it's not an IQ thing, really. It's like it's your senses, it's your receptors, it's listening, seeing, absorbing. You have an sensibility or a poetic sensibility, right? In a certain way, I feel like it is the extermination of poetry, because it's just industrializing. There's, everything is regimented into like, all of our time is accounted for now. The bills, we pay them. Everybody's in hustle culture and has 4 jobs. And so they want to eliminate poets. They want to eliminate daydreamers and writers and square pegs and unicorns and weirdos. They want everybody to be like on the dole and towing the line politically. In all its various forms. And they want writers who are that too. And I don't know, I don't see a lot of writers like taking risks. I see everybody trying to learn how to write into those confines. It's like, find your grievance, your identity grievance, find your trauma, find your story of like how you were fucked over, and just like fucking work that over until it's like really sings, and that's not to say that you can't write great books from that position, but I don't know. This country needs like truth and cultural accuracy more than ever. I hate to use that dreadful appellation or whatever. The dread with an ever. Like, and I think the publishing industry is just like all the other, as far as I can tell, the publishing industry is run like Turner Broadcasting. When I see the publishing industry, I see WCW Nitro. And there are some interesting independent presses to some degree. There's some I like more than others, but most of the best writers that I know are like totally unknown and don't have MFAs, actually. Like, Olivia didn't have an MFA. Nobody even tracks her as a writer per se, which is a shame. I feel like she should be writing for like the fucking New Yorker. Like, or any number of people at Poetry Project, or, you know. Anyway, there's more to be said. I feel like I didn't really. There's just no alternative space because the editors are not, that's not a priority for them. Class is not a priority. Just like everything, they all went to elite schools. They want to publish their friends. They want to publish famous people. Who was it I was reading? There's this one, you know, it's all like actors, people with social media accounts that have shitloads of followers, like Melissa Broder or Kelly Oxford. They'll give you a book deal if you know, if you have that, or Patricia Lockwood. Everybody thinks Patricia Lockwood is like, and I haven't read her novel and shit, but like, I don't know. I guess she's an example of somebody who's sort of in the in-between space. As far as like a middle American writer, you know, I think she lives in Chicago or something. She's pretty interesting. But there's an aspect of it that's like twee and shit that I'm not that into. It's just like, that's a lot of shit with my generation is like that, like Sufjan Stevens and McSweeney's and shit. She seems like she's got a little bit of that vibe. But it's like, I don't know. I'd like to believe that there's still room to like cause a sensation. Like, that's what I'm trying to do with my whole project. It's just like, when people catch on to what I'm doing, they're going to be like, this guy's an interesting writer. He's doing his own thing. He publishes these books. He's got these videos that are like poems. He hosts a reading. Like, when people put all that together, they're going to be like, okay, this is kind of an interesting alternative. We should, you know, we should make this guy a celebrity. Because I'm doing it differently. You know, I didn't get a fucking MFA. I didn't go to Iowa. I don't know if I could even get in, but I'm sure girls would like me a lot more if I did. Alright, I'm going to eat. Thank you for watching. We're at KGB tomorrow night, bringing you poetry, bringing you the true fucking university, the entertainment university. I'm in intellectual show business, and I'm going to intellectualize this country, re-educate America. They're not doing the universities. The universities have been corrupted. Get on my YouTube. My YouTube is a fucking master class. You can learn everything on my YouTube. Watch my videos, reactivate yourself, reawaken yourself, start open mics. I want this open mic thing to become like a thing. I want people to start open mics in towns all over the fucking country to imitate this one. Be like, I'm doing that. I'm going to put on an open mic like Matt Proctor. Like those people in New York. And I'm going to get performance artists and political people. It's going to be a town hall. Like in Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. And it's going to be a lecture hall like with you know, Charles Dickens, or I was reading about Thoreau's lectures the other day. Live speaking, everybody bringing their smartest words, smartest thoughts, whatever, jokes, what have you, songs, lyrics, speeches. Do it in your town. Do it at your school. Do it at the library, do it at the coffee house, do it at outside. Look at all my videos. See what I did. It's all there. The best house. Wrestling. Do whatever you have to do. I mean, I have performed in front of a lot of people, I think. I don't know if a lot of people remember me per se, but they certainly do it on social media. But I think the open mic is a good way for democracy, for conversation. It's a salon. It's Max's Kansas City. It's the third place. You know, everything is sewn up and financialized. Mentorships, right? This is one of the frustrating things about having been in downtown Manhattan is like, I thought I would, and I have had mentors and stuff and older people who I've formed relationships with, but the more famous people, you know, they have so many people coming after them, and their time is, they get paid too much. You know, their time is too important, so they're not necessarily available to that kind of informal it's all institutionalized. It's all done through these programs. They work at all these programs, these MFA programs, and so they don't want to do that in their private life. If you want to be mentored by them, you got to pay for it. And to me, that's just like, that's almost like sacrilege. That's capitalism. All these people are against fucking capitalism. It's like, put your money where your mouth is. I mean, that's the thing that's frustrating is I do feel like a lot of my choices are like me trying to be ethical. You know, the reason why I like stay out of work or I don't spend that much money, I don't travel, I don't have a car, I write poetry, I'm on YouTube, because like these are the most ethical decisions in ways that I feel like in the world that like in America, you know, everybody shits on American, you know, imperialist society or whatever. Meanwhile, they're all a part of it. They're all teachers at these universities and shit. It's like, to me, it's like you're spending money. You're a consumer. You're flying. You know, you have a huge carbon footprint. You're bourgeois. Like you're a part of the empire. Like I'm trying to work against it in my own small way. Bob said something about, you know, one person can change the world. I don't know if I say that, but like I think one person can have effect, and that's what I'm hoping. But we're just blanketed, I feel like, in preordained kind of media relationships and outcomes. It's like Judd Apatow puts his kid in a fucking show. It's produced by Barry Levinson's son. It's, you know, it's like all of this shit. Taylor Swift's parents are in finance. Her fucking album just came out. It's like, that's part of the... It's all these articles about her in the New York Times. It's like, it's because the chicks that write the newspaper are exactly who I've been talking about this whole video. They are Brooklyn chicks who are too good for the rest of us. They want to have non-white boyfriends. It's the right thing to do, I think. So they throw themselves guys. And they write articles about Taylor Swift for the New York Times and the New Yorker and every fucking thing. It's like Taylor Swift her album. Not to say that she doesn't have like power, because she does. Like, I'm not saying Taylor Swift isn't great, but it's like people lean on her the way they lean on Beyonce, and it's like they are these like homogenized corporate symbols. They're like Walmart or something. They're not, and they're great artists in their own way. Like, there's a lot more interesting shit happening out there. Like, Taylor Swift is so fucking corny, man. All of her like metaphors and shit are so goddamn childish and corny. And that's what they like about it. They want to live in like Home Alone 2 and Hocus Pocus and like the fucking Disney tapes they grew up on. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know why there aren't more like Raggedy Edge feminist women out there. It seems like all the women are so like successful and like in the system they think they're taking the system down from the inside, and I suppose in their own way they are, but like the book covers are hideous. I don't know. I haven't read Autessa Moshfegh. I should. I haven't read Sally Rooney. It's probably just them complaining about men. Most of chick lit or whatever. And not that Autessa Moshfegh or Sally Rooney is chick lit, but most of chick lit seems like them complaining about men. The same way that female empowerment, like people always talk about how like, female empowerment, say something is empowering, it's always like just like naked chicks. It's always just like naked pictures. To me, like female empowerment is another word for like naked pictures of women. Like, oh, it's so empowering. Like, I went out and I took these naked pictures of myself and put them on the internet. It was so empowering. Aren't there other ways to be, like, empowering? I mean, then, like, you know, I'm not a tradition, you know, I'm not skinny and I took pictures of myself and put them on the internet. Like, that's so empowering. I don't know. Like, there just needs to be better writing, is the point. And I think people use, like, their well-meaning kind of political identity thing as a wedge to, like, make themselves appear like they're great writers, or they're, like, but it's like, people are just trying to get every advantage they can, because we're in this competitive, professional, hyper-careerist. Everybody wants to be famous, everybody wants clout, everybody wants followers and likes, and to be a creative or to be an influencer. And so if you're not, you feel like a failure as an artist. It's just a lot of weight. It's a lot of pressure bearing down on you. And I read this poem, my friend's book the other day. It said, to those with talent but to those with intention but no talent, you know, get up on the stage or whatever. Leave me out of it. And I was like, is he writing about me? He thinks I have intention and no talent. Like, I don't think I have traditional poetry talent. I think I'm, like, good at, I can do all the things in poetry that are not, like, the most, like, poetry part to most people. But also, like, that's the part that, like, I think in some ways, I don't know, I'm trying to get away from. Like, poetry can be about anything. It can be about all levels. It doesn't necessarily have to be, like, this deep, brooding, painful thing. And that's not privilege, and that's not, like, being, like, apathetic or something either. Like, I think people taking responsibility for their own consciousness and educating themselves and being artists and living and paying attention and being sensitized and looking and seeing and hearing and thinking about everything that's going on in real time, I think that is the most political and most important thing you can do. And so that's what my work is about. My work is about showing people how I pay attention to my life and how I live artistically or ethically, or doing the best that I can, and just flowing. You know, I don't have a traditional MFA education. I know a few things that I learned through New York, and I put them together in a way that is not what you would learn in an MFA program. You know, I doubt it. There's probably nobody in the fucking poetry world who could host an open mic as good as me. A dubious, but I think people should pay attention to what I'm doing and actually think about it. Anyway, thank you for watching. Come to Mike tomorrow. We're there every Monday. Stay out of school.